your face gets ugly, then the heart grows more beautiful. At least that's what she tells me all the time. Your face is uglier.
That's the pull quote right there.
Yeah.
Your face is ugly.
Your face is uglier, but your heart is beautiful.
That's funny.
Yeah. Yes, they say that beauty is like a fine wine. It gets better with age. However, that's not true with you, honey. That's another one that she said. I'm just kidding. She doesn't at all.
Okay, I'm good.
Awesome. And then you're gonna also intro yourself before we start asking you questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're basically
Oh,
having
yeah.
a conversation with Austin.
Did you have specific ones though at the ones that I read that you want?
What?
State the question.
State the question.
Yeah.
That's right.
State the question and the answer, correct?
Yeah.
So you wanted healthy boundaries
Um,
or no?
I can answer any of them. You tell me, are these different than questions that everybody else answered?
Yeah, they're unique to you.
Okay. And the answer should go how long?
Honestly, just however long you want it to go. Like whenever you feel like you've said what you need to say, you can.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. Just
Yeah.
answer the question. You know.
Okay.
If it
Like
goes
if I
for
was
2
sitting
hours,
down
we'll
in your
cut you.
office
Yeah.
for a 30-minute meeting and I had a few questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah.
So you want to start with the intro?
Yeah. Am I looking at you?
Yes.
Am I having a conversation with you so my eyes are at you or the camera?
I think for the intro, it's probably okay if you do it right to the camera. But for the conversation, it's just you and Austin.
And in my intro, what am I communicating? What are the
Just
bullet
who
points?
you are, what you do, where you're from, maybe.
Okay.
Kind of like what you
Yeah,
did
like
in
if some-
Marin,
yeah.
in the beginning,
Sure.
like that sort of deal.
Yeah. I'm Clayton Coates from Coppell, Texas. Currently, grew up in Texas. Was just cut that, edit that out, right there. You got it. There you go. Easy to edit.
Sign for cut.
Easy to edit when you make motions, right? Hi, my name is Clayton Coates. I am married to Allison. Been married for 15 years now. We have 6 kids and currently reside in Coppell, Texas, where I am the lead pastor at Grace Point Church.
Okay.
Money.
Should've fixed that mic. Other than that, sounds great.
We do that again, or was it showing, or?
I just saw it off here. I can't even see it on here, but I just wanted to be sure.
Oh, okay, all right.
Cool. We're good to go?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. What are healthy boundaries related to personal sharing, time spent together, and physical boundaries in a dating relationship?
You know, in a dating relationship, there are these things we call boundaries. Boundaries can kind of be a buzzword, and you can say they're boundaries for everything. But remember that boundaries are twofold. Boundaries are to keep the good stuff in, the good stuff protected, and it's also to keep the bad stuff out. So boundaries really work, just like boundary, a fence line in your backyard. It keeps the good stuff in, keeps the bad stuff out. The dating relationship, it's no different. In fact, many times we find somebody that we're really interested in, and so the next day we're like, hey, let's go out and do something. Let's have lunch. Well, you like spending that time so much with them that you're like, well, what are you doing for dinner? And then what are you doing for lunch tomorrow? And then all of a sudden you find that in this relationship, it's been going, and you're spending all of your time away from work or away from school with this other person. Well, you know what? Even for a Christian, that can get kind of dangerous. Sometimes I like to call things not sexual fornication, but emotional fornication. And you're like, man, you're like old using this fornication word. That's something that they said at my granddad's church. And well, that may be. But nonetheless, if you've got a campfire and those embers get outside of that fire, it can get kind of dangerous. And so in a relationship, when you don't have these healthy boundaries of how much time we're going to spend together, then sometimes those boundaries can get blurred and your heart is attached to those things. The more time you spend together, the more your heart kind of gets into the relationship, and it can happen really fast to where all of a sudden you're like, whoa, we need a DTR, a define the relationship. We've all been there. We've all had those conversations. And so in a dating relationship, in order to kind of keep those embers in the fire where they need to be and to have those healthy boundaries established, you really have to ask the question, what is that appropriate amount of time? To where we're not spending so much time together, it's like we're already married. We're just not living under the same roof. And so when you ask this question, when you create this boundary, you have to move things from the quantity of time to the quality of time. People can spend so much time together. The quantity can be great, and they still don't know each other. And so that causes us to then ask the question, okay, what is the quality of that time that we're spending together? Have you thought about asking each other or the person that you're interested in questions like, you know what, when I say this, how do you receive that? Or what's some great stuff that happened to you when you were growing up? Or, if you grew up in church, was there a couple that you really remember looking at and saying, wow, they've got a healthy relationship? When I grow up, I want to have a relationship like theirs. And then ask the question, well, what are some of those qualities or characteristics that you saw in their relationship? Or you may ask the question when you think about quality of time of, what do you like to do with your time? Or what are some of those things that you don't like to do with your time? You have to ask yourselves questions that cause the relationship to go deeper, not just spending a bunch of time together. Anybody can spend a lot of time together, but what you're looking for and what you want to look for is the quality of time that you're spending together. So establish that boundary of that time that you spend together. And you know what? That goes hand in hand with creating another boundary, and that's the physical aspect of a relationship. Did you know that once the physical aspect of a relationship begins, that all of a sudden your heart and your emotions and your mind and the chemicals that are released in your mind, they can get pretty intense. And in fact, many people say, Pastor Clayton, how far is too far in a relationship? It's like this age-old question. Well, I like to turn the question and say, well, how far can you stay away from the physical? You see, when the physical enters into a relationship, it can gray your ability to appropriately discern and see if this is who God intends and desires for you to marry. And so when you leave more and more of the physical relationship out, you can more clearly see as you're walking in God's Spirit, as both of you guys are praying together, you can more clearly see and hear from the Lord and know if this relationship is the right relationship. Doing this for 22 years, the most difficult relationships that I've seen have been those relationships that when they're over, it's as if a part of that girl or that guy has been torn away. And I can say this to you that 100% of those situations are situations to where the physical entered into that relationship. You see, God's way is that when a guy and a girl come together and they are in this friendship, that they are adding to, because that's God's way. They're not taking away from. We see this rooted in John 3:16. You see, God's love is always a giving love. It's an adding to, not a taking away. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. Jesus didn't come into the world to steal, kill, and destroy, but He came into the world that you would have life and have it most abundantly. And so as you're in this relationship, you want to be in a relationship to where you're adding to the other person. And the physical can actually take away from the other person. Sometimes we use words that are manipulative because we have this physical need and we have this urge that we want to have filled or we want to have met. Well, manipulation, that should be one of those things that boundaries distance from a relationship. That physical is a big boundary. That you have to learn Okay, what stakes in the ground? What boundaries am I going to establish so that this physical doesn't gray my ability to see who it is that God desires for me to marry in my life? So when it comes to time spent, when it comes to the physical aspect of a relationship, these are two extremely important boundaries that you have to determine.
Awesome. What do you wish you could have told yourself when you were single or in the dating process?
You know, when I was in the dating process, you got to understand a little bit of my story is that I didn't have great relationships. Okay, I had been a pastor for a while, and I still didn't get the whole relationship thing. I really lived for myself. Pretty narcissistic, and I didn't have a lot of tools in that world, in that area of my life. And I remember, you know, the reason why I married my wife was not necessarily because I wanted to be married. It was that she was so different than any other relationship that I ever had that I didn't want to lose her. But I still didn't have a lot of these tools, these things that I wish that I had known. I wish that someone had told me these things while I was a single adult. That really pertain to how to have a relationship that honored God. And it really has to do with what I was talking about just a minute ago, and that is myself. I liked myself. I was pretty prideful. I was pretty focused on me because, you know, I'd been single for a while. I'd kind of said, whatever, if it's just me and Jesus for the rest of my life, good. I'm good with that. I knew what time I had to wake up. I knew where I needed to be, when I needed to be there. I did what I wanted to do. I wore what I wanted to do. I ate what I wanted to eat. I squeezed the toothpaste from the location on the toothpaste dispenser that I wanted to squeeze from. I did all of these things, and I was pretty good at living for me, doing what I wanted to do. And no one ever came alongside me and said, you know what, Clayton, Ephesians 5:23 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I really wish that I had known that. Because it's taken me many years into my 15 years of marriage to figure that out. And marriage is not about me. What works is when I lay myself down. Jesus Christ died for the church. He is the example for me as a follower of Jesus Christ in relationship to my bride. You see, the church is Christ's bride, and Allison is my bride. And so it is my responsibility to lay myself down for her, to surrender myself, to sacrifice myself, to give up oftentimes what it is that I want to fill my ego, so that I am blessing her and I'm creating this environment where she thrives in her relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, what this looks like is this. Because see, the old Clayton would think, wow, if you surrender yourself, you're never going to get what you want. Right? Because that's the flesh talking. That's where God is so brilliant. One of the ways in which God's so brilliant. What happens is, when I actually surrender my life and I serve my bride, she graciously yields herself to me. Because in and of who she is, in her DNA, who God created her to be, God created her to want a godly man who loves the Lord and will sacrifice for her. see, God's way works. And, when I was a single guy and when I was dating, even when I was dating who would be my bride, Allison, I just didn't know humility. And that's something that, man, you can't go backwards, you can't turn the clock back, but that's one of those tools, that's one of those things that, man, really would have helped me move light years further than where I am 15 years into marriage.
Cool. Alright, so then the next question that I'll ask you is, how would you expect Christian Mingle for churches to benefit church members? Do you hear that?
Yeah, what is that?
Oh, that would be bad.
Mid-shooting?
That's crazy that you're staying so close to where I live. How long did it take you to get here this morning?
25?
That's not bad. For LA, where I just moved there on Sunday.
Because I'm still rolling.
Oh, you're still rolling?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to...
Are we waiting for Alex to come back or
I
no?
think he's just going to keep
Okay.
us quiet. I mean, whatever you want.
Let's do it. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Just see if there's anything.
I just didn't know if we were waiting on him. Oh, it looks beautiful outside. That's a first for a few days.
Whatever that buzzing is at. I hear it, but let's just keep going.
Alright.
Christian Mingle can benefit. Are we benefiting the church? Are we benefiting the pastor? Are we benefiting the singles community? Who are we benefiting?
Church members, so singles within a church.
Singles within a church?
Yeah. Or just a whole singles community within a church.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel like you really like to speak to most, just go for it.
Okay. When I think about Christian Mingle, and I think about Christian Mingle in the local church, I come from a place of experience. I've been a singles pastor for many years, and I've been a singles pastor at churches that had 10 singles to 100 singles to thousands of singles, over 16,000 in fact. And so the thing that I like about, one of the aspects I like about Christian Mingle is that it can strengthen the singles community by providing a platform for people to connect with one another virtually. And let me communicate why that's important. A great motivating factor for many single adults in attending church is, does that church have a group of single adults where potentially I can find God's match for me or someone for me? And as soon as they go to that church, look around, maybe they date a few, if it's a guy, they date a few girls or vice versa, and then they haven't found that match, then the motivating factor for leaving that local congregation, that local church, is to then go find potentially their match in another location. And so the motivating factor for a lot of single adults, in my experience, has been finding someone to date, potentially to marry. And so the commitment to the local congregation was always secondary. In fact, many times the commitment to the Lord was always secondary. Well, one of the things I love to communicate to single adults is, if you want to find God's match for you, you chase after God. Just run as hard and fast as you can after Him, and then you look to your left and your right and you see who's running alongside you. And typically that's going to be who God has intended for you. The local church is a place where you can establish your roots. You can establish that system of community. With Christian Mingle, you have the ability to be committed to a local church and to chase after the Lord. And then online, you can find those relationships. And you can date. You can bring the virtual to the realistic location. And so for a community and for the church, for strengthening the church, for strengthening individuals, for strengthening young adult ministries or singles ministries, it's so important because now you can be committed. You can be committed to the Lord, that local community, and you can also find God's match for you. And it may not sound like a big deal, but for a local pastor who's been doing this for 22 years, it is a big deal. You know, God desires for you to be committed to Him. God desires for you to be committed to a local church. So do those two things. And then in your heart pray, and then in your heart seek who it is that God would have for you in your life in marriage.
Perfect. Awesome. That was great.
That work?
Yeah. Done good. Yeah.
Anything else?